Jungle is the role that has the most impact on the map. However, unlike most other roles, junglers are not tied down to one location for the majority of the game. They constantly swap sides of the map, doing objectives on either side of the map, performing ganks, and the such. The jungler swapping back between sides of the map is what allows their ganks to be so successful, since you never really know where the enemy jungler is going to be. Today we're going to be covering a highly requested topic that helps solve this problem: jungle tracking. This video has been a long time coming, so make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. For your best shot at climbing, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. Over there we've got hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. Getting your GameLeap Premium membership today is going to help you learn all of the essentials of League, helping you climb as quickly as possible. Now, jungle tracking is going to be pretty much entirely about knowledge, and the more knowledge you can come into the game with, the better you're going to be at tracking the enemy jungler. So what kinds of knowledge are we looking to come into the game with? Well, the most important thing is you need to know the enemy jungle's first clear. Now, there are quite a few different initial clears that a lot of different junglers have. You can go for a full clear, you can go for 3 camp into invade, you can go for red buff straight into a gank, you can go for 3 camp and then gank one of the side lanes. There are so many different things that the enemy jungler can do, and knowing which one that jungler is going to prefer to do is going to allow you to track them so much easier. Just to give you a few examples, champions like Jarvan and Xin Zhao are going to look to do their red buff and then immediately gank a lot of the time because their level 2 ganks are frequently strong enough to result in either a flash or a kill. On the other hand, if you're playing against something like Karthus or Evelynn, you know that they're most likely just going to full clear and get level 6 as quickly as possible. Other champions like Trundle, Olaf, and Lee Sin find a lot of success at Skull Crab skirmishes early on at level 3 or even 4. Elise or Shaco might invade you looking for a kill early on at your second buff. Now obviously we can't cover every jungler in this video, but it is important for you to kind of understand what the meta junglers are going to look to do in any given game. Now, it might happen that somebody would deviate from the standard clear on a pick. Say they might play Jarvan and then full clear on their initial clear. This is not something that you can really predict. You don't know exactly what they're going to do. You're just giving yourself the best chance to be right. This gives you a general idea of what you want to expect, which will then allow you to place wards, which will give you information on where they went during their initial clear or after their initial clear. Against different types of clears, you want to place different wards. So for example, against a champion that would start red buff and then gank level 2, you would want to place very early wards at level 1 in between the red buff and your lanes. That way your lane knows if they are coming for a level 2 gank, and then you can counter that with an invade on their blue buff or with a counter gank if you start at the same side of the map. These early wards allow you to react to what the enemy jungler is doing and then make a play of your own. Remember, jungle tracking is super important, but you also have to react to knowing where they are, to having the information. Now, these wards are really great for if you do see the enemy jungler, but they're also very important if you don't see the enemy jungler. Now, the way you would place your first ward is going to depend obviously on that first clear, like I already mentioned. And if you're not playing against a level 2 jungler, you're going to have to determine where they started. The great thing about jungle tracking is it's something that you can do regardless of what role you are playing. You don't have to be the jungler to track the enemy jungler. You can do it from support, ADC, mid, top. It does not matter. Now, if you are playing one of the side lanes, it's actually going to be a lot easier to track the enemy jungler than anything else. And the reason why is because if you play one of the side lanes, either top lane or bot lane, that means that you know which lane arrived late. So for example, if you had to leash and the enemy lane did not have to leash, that means they're going to be in lane before you can get to lane. And vice versa, if you don't have to leash and the enemy laner does have to leash, that means that you're going to be in lane before them. This is something that a lot of players don't take into account. If you arrived in your lane a considerable amount of time before the enemy laners did, then that means that the enemy jungler started on your half of the map. This is information that is very important to communicate with the rest of your team because it allows you to determine where they're going to be for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Now, sometimes you will play against junglers who just don't actually need a leash. This is going to be stuff like Kayn, Fiddlesticks, and these are just going to be impossible to know where they started. They can start on either side of the map, and you just don't know where they started if they didn't get a leash, and that's something that you can't really control. It makes tracking those champions pretty hard, but for the vast majority of champions, this is not a problem. Back to the topic of wards, where should we be placing our wards to help track the jungler past the first clear? Let's start with top and bot lane, the side lanes. Now, when you place your ward is actually going to change depending on where the enemy jungler started. If the enemy jungler started on the same side of the map as you, then you want to place your ward immediately. Place it as soon as possible. Try not to miss EXP in order to place this ward, but place it as quickly as possible because this is going to allow you to know if you're being ganked before the enemy jungler swaps sides of the map. Now, yes, these wards are going to be great if the enemy jungler does gank you. It's going to show the enemy jungler, and that's going to give you enough warning to back off and prevent yourself from dying. But it's very important to remember that jungle tracking is more about where the enemy jungler is not rather than where they are. The fact that you don't see the enemy jungler on certain wards and you know that certain camps are down allows you to determine exactly where the enemy jungler is. Most players, when they're new to jungle tracking, make the huge mistake of trying to guess what camp the enemy jungler is on at any given moment in the game. However, this is not what jungle tracking is about. Tracking the enemy jungler is always about establishing where the enemy jungler cannot be, and that allows you to determine a certain area where the enemy jungler is. If you get good enough at this, you can pretty much always determine what side of the map the enemy jungler is on. And then from that point, you look at those lanes. So if you know that the enemy jungler is topside and you see that your top laner is pushing in towards the enemy top lane, towards that tower, and they're a little bit low, then you know that your top laner might be in danger of being ganked. You know that that enemy jungler is probably looking up there, seeing that tasty top lane kill, and pathing immediately towards that. Now, of course, this is an ideal scenario. You won't always have the ward coverage in order to determine what side of the map the enemy jungler is on, or rather, what side they aren't on. If this is the case, if you don't have any wards out, then try to go and get a pink ward somewhere in the river, try to get a deep ward somewhere on the enemy jungle camps, and that's going to allow you to see where the enemy jungler is pathing. If, as a mid laner, you're able to get a deep ward on the enemy raptors and you see that the enemy jungler paths from Krugs to raptors, then you know they're not going to path back towards the Krugs. That would just be super inefficient. They're then going to path into their wolves or into a mid lane gank or something else. Remember that the enemy jungler is going to be looking to maintain as efficient of a clear as possible. So if you can kind of figure out where they're coming from and where they're going, then you can know the general area of where there will be based off of one ward. After those raptors, do we know exactly where the enemy jungler is going? No, we don't. They could be going to blue. They could be going to wolves. They could be looking to solo a dragon or rift herald. You don't know exactly what they're doing, but you know the general area, which is the most important thing. These initial 2 or 3 tips are going to be the hardest to master, and that's just because it requires so much knowledge and discipline in order to get down and to consistently do. That covers the vast majority of jungle tracking, but obviously this won't make your jungle tracking perfect. There's still a few more tips that are going to really help you step up your game, and if you're not already using these, then definitely start because they're just very fast, simple tips that you can apply really quickly to help improve your jungle tracking. Tip number 1, remember that most junglers will not recall and then pass to the same side of the map that they just recalled from. This means that you can assume that if the enemy jungler recalled on a certain side of the map, that they then switched to the other side of the map. This helps you track that enemy jungler past the initial clear. Now, the later the game goes, the less applicable this tip is going to be, but very early on into the game, it's going to be almost always the same thing unless you're vertical jungling, in which case sometimes you will just pass to the same side of the map for the first even 10 minutes of the game. However, if you're not splitting a map, then this means that they're almost always going to recall and then swap sides of the map. So this is something that you can definitely use, especially if the enemy jungler performs a gank and recalls within sight. Next up, weigh in the value of objectives. A lot of junglers will break their pathing in order to go for objectives. For example, the enemy jungler might be topside doing their Krugs and Raptors, and then instead of pathing towards wolves, they might go for a Rift Herald. They might also look for a top lane gank immediately afterwards. This case or this scenario is going to be much more likely the later the game goes. This is because as the game goes later, it's just easier for the jungler to do these things. And they're very, very impactful. Rift Heralds can give you plates or even towers. They can get up to inhibitors on a really good push, and dragons, of course, start building towards that dragon soul. So as the game goes later, these objectives are going to be a higher priority for a lot of junglers, which is why they might not choose to path in a straight line, and they might break that pathing in order to go for one of these objectives. So what are the signs that the enemy jungler might be going for one of these objectives? The first is if that side of the map just recalled. For example, if you are playing Shyvana and the enemy bot lane just recalled, then you can easily solo that dragon. Nobody really is going to contest you. Even if the jungler comes, your bot lane can easily show up before theirs does, which means jungle is going to look for dragon if they are very familiar with jungle. The second, very similar to recalling, is if you just killed people on that side of the map. Again, nobody can contest the objective, so you can easily go for it. Next up is a jungler that can easily sneak the objective. This is going to be stuff like, again, Shyvana, something that can easily do objectives even pre-6, or something like Shaco, who with his clone can, again, very easily sneak and solo those objectives. If the enemy jungler has been very diligent about the first few dragons, for example, then you can pretty much guess that they're going to be continuing to do so. They're going to continue to want to do those dragons as soon as they spawn. And that is one way that you can tell that, hey, dragon is spawning. They're pretty much almost guaranteed to be bot lane if they're just taking those dragons off cooldown. This last tip is actually something that you can apply to a lot of different junglers. It doesn't just apply to junglers who only spam dragons off of cooldown, right? Most junglers have certain habits. They have certain ways that they play the game. So if you notice that you're playing against a Pantheon jungle who's just spam ganking bot lane, then you know that most of the game they're going to be bot, and that's going to help you play in response. Most junglers are habitual players, and they will continue to play the certain way that they have been playing for the first 15 minutes or so of the game, and that's something you can definitely abuse. You can look to counter gank, you can look to invade the opposite side of the jungle, you can look to gank the opposite side of the map. It really depends on what they're doing, but if you notice a trend, then keep that in mind, because it's going to help you so much when trying to figure out where that jungler is. Remember, League is a strategy game, and there is an ideal way to play it, but humans are habitual creatures, and they don't like to break their habits. It's very comfortable to just play the game a certain way for the entire game long. That's why you see players who play Tryndamere and just split push for the entire game, even if it's not always the right call. And the same thing applies for junglers and jungle tracking. If the enemy jungler is just spam ganking one lane, then it's very safe to assume they're going to continue doing that. And if you see a gank opportunity in that lane, you can infer that the enemy jungler is going to be there if they have been ganking that lane throughout the entire game. There are very few players who are disciplined enough to be able to switch up their playstyle or just play the ideal way throughout the entire game with absolutely no bias. Even when I'm jungling, I prefer to play a very invade-heavy playstyle, and that's something that if I play against a player who knows who I am and they know that I like to invade, they will ask for help from their team and they will be able to kind of tell what I'm going to do before I do it. They're able to track me pretty easily by kind of figuring out where they're going to be vulnerable in their jungle. So for example, if I'm playing Elise and they know they're going to be vulnerable on their second buff, then they are very safe to assume that I am invading that second buff. That's a very easy way to track me personally as a player based off of my habits. This is something that a lot of players don't even take notice of. They don't even try and establish the enemy jungler's behaviors or habits or patterns because they don't think it's important. But if you are able to do it really early on into the game, then for the whole game, you can kind of tell what they're looking to do. Have they been power farming for the first 6 minutes? It's likely they're going to continue to do so until they have their items. This makes it very easy to track them. You know they're going in the most efficient way as possible. They're going to be straight line clearing before looking to do anything. Are they invading you over and over again? Again, very easy to tell where they're going to be because you know where you're going to be vulnerable and where they want to look to kill you. Are they playing Jarvan, a spam gank champion? Cool, you know that they're going to take their buffs and they're just going to look to gank as much as possible on that side of the map. The last part of jungle tracking is if you do know where the enemy jungler is, or if you have a suspicion, then ping it out. Now, trust me, I know, just because you pinged does not mean your team will listen. Recently, I've been playing on a fresh account through lower elos, and trust me, there have been cases where me and my duo have pinged like 24 times for our bot lane to back off, and they don't do it and they get double killed. It happens. Sometimes your team just doesn't want to listen. It's not in your control. The only thing you can do is drop those pings and hope your team listens. This is not an exaggeration, by the way. We literally played a game where we pinged our bot lane 24 times and they did not back off and they died. This was not a hyperbole in any way. So it does happen. As a closing note, you can't always know where the enemy jungler is, but sometimes somebody on your team will know. So if you are being pinged and spam pinged off of something, then they probably know something that you don't and you should probably back off. Are they always going to be right? No, sometimes you get pinged off and nobody is near you. But it's better safe than sorry. There have been so many times, especially in Challenger, where I get pinged off of something and I'm very confident that nobody else is in my lane, but I still back off just in case. Just to recap, in order to track the enemy jungler properly, first of all, you need to come into the game with a certain amount of knowledge. Know the initial clear of the champion you're playing against, and know the meta clears that are being played at the moment. These two things will be able to help you figure out what the enemy jungler is going to look to do from level 1. Past that point, you want to drop an early ward. This is going to tell you where the enemy jungler is, but it's also, more importantly, going to tell you where the enemy jungler is not, which then allows you to tell where they are going. Remember, the enemy jungler has a limited amount of options where they can go from any certain point. If you can eliminate one of them, then you know they took a different one. If it helps, kind of imagine it as a flowchart. Are they on Raptors? No, then they're on something else. Make sure you weigh the value and likelihood of certain objectives or ganks on certain sides of the map. If your top lane is way overextended, they're probably going to get ganked if the jungler is up there. Get to know standard cheese plays like Shaco sneaking dragon at level 6 or Shyvana taking dragon early on. Stuff like this is going to be very easy for you to tell where they are. You can place a ward on the dragon. As soon as they start it, you can probably get a free kill off of that. Also know that the enemy jungler is going to look for certain objectives when certain lanes are based or when they have the advantage in certain lanes. If their bot lane can rotate to dragon first, they're going to be more likely to go for that dragon. Finally, know that habits play very heavily into how most junglers play the game. If they've been doing one certain thing over and over and over again, then you can infer that they will continue to do that thing and you can play around it. Jungle tracking is something that takes a lot of concentration and a lot of practice in order to master, so don't get discouraged if you're not able to do it really well early on. It's going to take a lot of practice. Just stick with it. You'll get better, I promise. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you like the video and subscribe, and you can head over to our website, GameLeap.com, to check out more content from us. Over there, we've got hundreds of guides, all done by Challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. As always, I'm Panther, I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.